So, Dr. Avery, thank you for talking with me. Let's start at the very beginning. Where and when were you born?
Well, I was born in Queens, New York. The house where I grew up was in a neighborhood called Jamaica Estates. Some people call it Hollis. And I grew up in a house with my extended family. There were 8 of us, and my grandparents lived there, their kids. My great-grandfather lived there, so there was a lot of people always to play with. It was a great home. And the other thing when I talk about where I was born, I always remember that my elementary school was right across the street, and I used to come home for lunch every day and eat with my grandmother. And that's about it. I mean, I remember going back a few years ago, actually, to look at the house where I grew up, and maybe things seem so much bigger when you're a small person and you're very young, but the house, I always thought it was this mansion, with endless rooms. And I went back and I looked at it. It was this very modest, small house.
How many bedrooms
still the house
were there?
Oh, gosh. Well, we had 8 people. So we had 3 bedrooms on the first floor. We had 2 bedrooms on the second floor. And then there was a bedroom they created in the basement for their oldest son. So it seemed like a big house.
Well, that's
maybe just not that much square footage.
Yeah, that's a lot of bedroom. What month were you born and year, if you don't mind saying? I'm interested in your astrological sign.
Oh, interesting. I was born February 22nd, 1970.
So is that Pisces?
It is. It is on the cusp of Aquarius, but it's Pisces, yeah.
And do you feel like a sensitive, sometimes can't make up my mind between 2 directions person, or not?
I would say that making decisions is something that I have worked on for many years of my life. Yes. And it's still something I work on. But I don't think it's, so much my nature as I think I'm just careful. I want to research things. Part of, I guess, my training as a scholar is I do research things a lot. So I just want to have all the information. I'm very analytical before I make a decision.
Can't fault that. When you were growing up, was your family observant in terms of their religious practices?
They were, yeah. My home was Jewish conservative, which means, for anyone listening to the show who doesn't know the Jewish branches, so in like the modern state of the world, Judaism has 3 main branches. There are more, but 3 main ones. Reform, which is more
liberal,
less observant on rituals, but more focused on social ethics and action. Orthodox, which is more focused on maintaining all the rituals, also focused on social ethics and action, but I would say putting emphasis on observing in the same tradition. And then conservative falls somewhere in the middle. So that's where we were. So we were kosher, and we went to shul on the high holidays, and we did observe the Sabbath, but not fully. So I grew up conservative.
And did observing the Sabbath mean that you didn't do work or electronic devices, that kind of thing?
Yeah, good question. So it meant, sorry, I wish my phone didn't throw my computer off. So I'm back. Sorry about that. So we started the Shabbat Friday night with a special meal and blessings over bread and wine. And then my grandfather owned a store where he would close the store for the Sabbath, but he was open on Sunday. So he was open 6 days a week, but not on the Sabbath. So no, we didn't work. We did cook and we did turn on lights. We didn't, observe it that strictly. But it was certainly a special day where we didn't partake of our regular business.
Yeah. But before we leave Judaism, I've been thinking about initiation rituals and how in broader, I guess you could say Western culture, what is it to become an adult? You have sex, you get a driver's license, you get drunk when you're a fresh person in college. I don't know. but having bar mitzvah or bas mitzvah, did that serve to make you feel like you had some guidance into becoming an adult?
That's so funny you say that. My mother was bas mitzvahed, and that was back in the 60s. But after my grandparents had, my mom had a younger sister who did not get bas mitzvahed, but had a sweet 16. And then when I came along, I was given a choice between being bas mitzvahed and having a sweet 16. And at that age, I have to say, I chose the sweet 16 because it seemed a whole lot more fun and attractive.
Does it just mean a big party with fancy dresses? It's like a quinceanera.
Yeah. I mean, I guess that was the ritual for becoming an adult. 3 years later than the bas mitzvah would have been. But I chose to do that instead of going to Hebrew school. And, so that's something still on my bucket list. I haven't been bas mitzvahed. And so I do think it's important to have that kind of structure, and it gives you a sense of responsibility at a young age to understand that you do have a purpose and you do have a contribution, and there is something that there is a structure to follow and a sense of yourself as a meaningful entity in this world, for lack of any other way of putting it to me.
This is really a different facet, but I've been reading about epigenetics and how our environmental stressors or circumstances can be passed on to our ancestors, our descendants, and the example that people give most often is Holocaust survivors, that their descendants tend to be more fearful, anxious. Do you find that true just anecdotally in terms of what you've seen? Is that a fair analysis?
That's interesting. I mean, the way I agree with you, and I've always understood it in a language of, it's more of a Buddhist language, I guess, of habit energies. So habit energies get passed from parents to their children, and that could be fear and as well as courage and sadness or things like that. My grandparents were not Holocaust survivors. They actually, their parents got out earlier, around the turn of the century, so around 1900 was when they started coming over to the country. So I didn't personally have that experience. Maybe the Great Depression might have been something that affected me more, where, it's funny, I remember my grandparents, we always had an abundant amount of food, but we always had to finish everything on our plate. And then we were offered seconds, as if the world was going to completely run out of food. We had to fill up. And also money. We did have plenty of money, thankfully from the business, but it was never that we were extravagant. We had to save our money and never spend lavishly on clothes or food or anything like that. There were more important things that we needed money for. So I think maybe that event in history definitely affected how I was raised, and I'm very much the same way. I'm very prudent with money. I don't like to waste food, but I see other families who always leave a piece of food on their plate. And I'm still thinking, well, I know there's a meaning behind that too, and it definitely comes from their parents. But we could never leave that on our plate. It was too much of a scarcity, understanding of scarcity, I think. So yeah, I agree with that. It's interesting. In terms of the Holocaust, I can't say personally, but certainly I think there's a sensitivity in my world as a Jewish person to any kinds of marks of anti-Semitism and how these things can spiral out of control. They really can, because it's still very much in our culture. It always has been for thousands of years. So that's certainly a sensitivity that's always been there, and that certainly I think the Holocaust was just a culmination of so many years of pogroms and and other anti-Semitic behaviors. It's hard to say it was just that, but it's always there, a sensitivity, I would say.
How does that tie into the fact that in all my studies, Jews are overrepresented in terms of being innovators, thinkers. I did a trilogy on visionary scientists, and way more were Jewish than are the 2% or whatever of the world that's Jewish, whatever it is. And, Einstein and Marx and Freud, and, you could go on and on in terms of influential thinkers who are Jewish. What's the correspondence between being on the outskirts and being innovators and brilliant thinkers?
That's such a good question. I do know there are so many brilliant Jewish innovators. I know they're Jewish, not just Jewish innovators. So they are in every religious tradition. You have innovators, but being on the outskirts, I think the Jewish people have had to figure it out to survive over a long, long history. And so I think that's one aspect of it, that we have to come up with creative ways of surviving in society that doesn't necessarily want us here. And I say that now, of course, our society here has been amazing, but historically speaking. And so that's part of it. Innovation, I think, had to be there. How do we observe our religion as well when the world observes differently? That needs innovation too. So we might close on Saturday, but the world closes on Sunday. So there's a way that we need to, I think that is differently. I think also education, when the Second Temple was destroyed in 70, long time ago, something had to replace it, and really what replaced it was study of Torah and study of the scriptures. So study is also built in to the tradition very, very strongly. So we don't go to the temple and make sacrifices anymore. We study, and that takes the place of it for blessings. And so I think maybe the combination of all of that has created some really incredible insights.
And let's go back to your younger years and what led you to get a Ph.D. Why did you decide to do that rather than be a business person or something like your grandfather?
I still like being a business person. I run a nonprofit now, and actually I find myself very fulfilled in doing that. But I did want to get a PhD. I guess I was always compelled to study myself. I did comparative religion for my undergraduate degree back at McGill University, and I went on to do a... Oh, sorry?
In Montreal.
In Montreal, yeah. And then I went straight on to do a master's degree, and I did that at King's College in London because of a professor of mine I really loved who had gone there as well. I also wanted to go. And then I came back to the States, to New York City. I did work for a while, and then I decided I wanted to do a PhD at that point. But I had a very, very highly specialized degree in Hebrew Bible from London. So I actually applied and went to Yale Divinity School to broaden my base for the PhD. And then after that, I didn't apply directly, which was interesting. I decided to go back into the workforce. So I again moved back to New York City. I hope this story is not getting too long.
No, it's great.
But that's when I sat down with myself and I said, I have 3 degrees in religious studies. If I don't do a PhD, what on earth am I going to do? Because you can't get a faculty position really, with not a full-time one, without a PhD. And there weren't a lot of job options. So I just started talking to people, and this was 1998, and that's when this whole movement for diversity in the workplace really started taking root. I noticed it was happening in a lot of companies, and I started talking to people who were doing the trainings. And I said, well, I have so much knowledge about religions of the world and how they operate. And I asked cultural trainers, do you talk about religion in your trainings? And they said, no, never. And they thought, in the interviews I did, they never thought that religion was really the core of an issue in the workplace. And I very much disagreed with them. So I decided to start my own business, and that's what I did. So I actually went into the field of religious diversity. I just created a little website. I started calling companies. I got one client, then I got a second client, and I just started, building up my business. And then I went to work with a company in Massachusetts who really did the whole gamut of organizational change and diversity, training and inclusion. I started working with them, and it was just a tremendous career for me for many years until I decided to then go back and do my Ph.D. And I did want to do the Ph.D. at that point.
Before we get to the Ph.D., could you give an example, without naming it necessarily, of how religious diversity issues played out in a workplace where you helped them out?
Yeah, so diversity comes, I think one of the best and easiest examples is how religious diversity plays out in healthcare environments. Where you have nurses and doctors and administrative staff, palliative care, for example, chaplains who are working with the whole of the population, so you have Muslims and you have Jews and you have, Christians, and you have particular kinds of Christians, and you have Hindus and Buddhists, and how do you navigate sometimes the very different needs of the people that you see, even without stereotyping. So just the other day, for example, one of our clients shared that there was a Jewish man who told the nurse that he wanted to observe Shabbat. And she got a little bit of brain freeze, I call it, in the moment, because she said, oh, okay, but what do I do about that? And so we might know something about, and it's helpful for people to know something about what Jewish people will do for Shabbat. But really, a lot of my coaching is also how to talk to people and ask them what they want. So having a general base of knowledge, but then role-playing and saying, well, what are the, how can I support you in that? What things might you need? And often it's as simple as that, but it makes a very big difference. Or Muslim practitioners, for example, women who really should have female practitioners working with them. But oftentimes it's not possible to have that. And how do you navigate these difficult situations where you might be short-staffed? Maybe they can have another person in the room. So we navigate situations like that in the workplace.
Or I'm thinking of an Orthodox single man who doesn't feel he should touch women. How does he navigate having women nurses touching him all over? Is that an issue?
I haven't had that one in particular, more in a Muslim context. Male practitioners with female patients is a very sensitive issue, and it's navigated differently. It does come up. So having a third party present, having their husband present, there are ways, if it has to be done, that you can navigate it. And if it's not possible, realizing that this will cause the patient sometimes extreme discomfort and stress is then something you could talk to them about again and say, I acknowledge that this is a modesty issue for you and a religious issue, and there's no way we can accommodate this right now. Maybe if we wait for half an hour, if it's not an emergency, maybe they're willing to wait for half an hour for a female practitioner. So there are just different ways. If you open up that dialogue, that the stress doesn't need to be there, and it's assuaged in the dialogue.
Got it. Do you feel like saying the name of your company in case anybody needs that kind of service?
Sure. Well, right now, the religious diversity in the workplace work that I do is with Hartford International University for Religion and Peace. So I work with them as a fellow at their university, and we do the outreach to companies. So I would say go to them.
Yeah, okay. You know, it would be really fascinating would be to go to Saudi Arabia and see how they navigate all those gender restrictions and requirements. I think that would be fascinating. I'd love to be
I agree.
fly on the wall. Have you been to Israel?
I have.
And what
Long
did that
time
feel
ago.
like where everybody is just about celebrates Sabbat or says Sabbat, you know, greetings? Did it feel different and embracing?
It does feel different because the dominant culture is, of course, my own. And yes, it certainly feels different. It feels different. And, you know, I love living here in the U.S., so I don't think I would move. But it's important, because I do have 2 kids. And it's important that they get that sense of what it's like to be in that community. So, you know, just we had an amazing Hanukkah celebration here the other day, and we got to go, and it was, you know, in the public square here in Greenwich where I live, and there was the 12-foot menorah that they lit with torches, and the fire truck was there, and then just the party. So all the kids got glow sticks, and they threw gelt, you know, the little foil coins off the top of the fire truck, and the kids were looking for it in the dark with their glow sticks, and they're searching, and it was just an amazing event. My daughter was singing and they were dancing, and you know, so it's important, I think, to feel a part of, like, even here it took many years for the town to allow a public celebration of Hanukkah right there on Greenwich Avenue. And it's important to feel that you're part of the community. You're not just part of your own little community, but you're really part of the larger community.
Mm-hmm. And so tell us about your dissertation topic. And you talk about mimetic desire. I have no idea what that is.
Oh, that's a can of worms. Okay, so this idea of, well, mimesis very simply means imitation. And then there's this idea of mimetic desire. So I learned of this from a scholar named René Girard. He was an emeritus professor at Stanford University. And before that, he was at Johns Hopkins. He was a French scholar of literature, really. So he taught literary theory and also, you know, went strongly into different social sciences too, because his theories crossed over. But so Girard detected this idea of mimesis through studying classical texts like Shakespeare and Proust and Dostoevsky. And he noticed that the characters and their relationships in those texts, as well as their kind of self-reflection, said something about their being in the world. So anyway, this will come clear in a minute. So mimesis means imitation, and mimetic desire is literally imitating the desires of others. So simply, we want what others want. There's almost nothing that we want. Well, really, Girard would say there's nothing that we want that is not a reflection of our society or what others have already. So we want things because others want them. If no one else wants them, they're not desirable.
Can you think of a cross-cultural difference in desire of something that one culture does not want that another culture really wants?
What an interesting question.
I'm thinking of like dating, like in Muslim countries, India, dating is frowned upon, and maybe people don't want to date. They're happy to have the families arrange the marriage, where here in the Western world, teens want to date. Does that fit?
Well, it's a cultural value, so how do we distinguish that? See, if I think Girard would go underneath that even and say, the people in that culture already want arranged marriage. It's built into the culture. Therefore, you need to want that too. So all the people who are brought up in that culture would automatically be told to want that. And there are some people that don't want that, and it creates a real rift, quite a large conflict. So I'm not sure that I could say that that's not mimetic. I think I think mimesis comes from the culture.
Yeah, that was my example of what would be mimetic. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's a great example. So ultimately, this kind of mimesis does create conflict, because if you think about it, I always think of two children. One child is, the two children are in a room and they have a choice of toys. And one child will go for this toy, and it's inevitable that the second child will also want to play with the same toy.
Yeah.
And then you'll have a conflict. Why does the second child need that toy when maybe it's not even something they're particularly compelled to play with, without the other kid there? So we want what others want, and that's, from a very young age, you can see that. But it doesn't go away when we're older. It just gets hidden underneath other things. Even marketing, I always think, is very mimetic in how it operates. So if Kim Kardashian is drinking, Essentia brand water, and I go to the supermarket, I see Essentia brand water, and I buy it because, it's not just because Kim Kardashian was drinking it, it's I can be like, or I could be Kim Kardashian if I drink that water.
God forbid, but yeah, I get it.
But it works on that principle, that's marketing. And the closer people get, if I actually became Kim Kardashian, it's maybe a terrible example, but if I actually became Kim Kardashian, there becomes a rivalry the closer I get to her fame and her power and her status. So you see it in Cain and Abel in the Bible, where all of a sudden, one kills the other because they're brothers. Cain will never be able to sacrifice in the way that Abel is and have it accepted by God. So he kills him in order to supplant him in a way and be the one offering the sacrifice that's acceptable. Anyway, does that explain it?
Yeah, but I'm not clear how it ties into all your religious studies.
So Girard noticed this from the classic text, but he then went on to explain Christianity through this lens, which is really revolutionary for a lot of people. It was revolutionary for Girard because he went from being an atheist to being a devout Catholic after he had this insight. And he looked at the New Testament particularly, and he examined the event of the crucifixion not as a theological event, but an anthropological event of different groups being in a kind of mimetic conflict for power. And when the power struggle happens, when this mimesis is really getting too heated, the only way to reconcile it is to create a scapegoat. So he saw Jesus as the scapegoat of a heated mimetic rivalry.
Between Romans, Jews, Greeks.
There were all those groups there. Yeah, exactly. So he saw it as a scapegoating event. And then he looked at other types of literature. He looked at the Vedas of Hinduism. He looked at the Hebrew scriptures. I think he also did a work on Islam. And I've even written articles since then on world religions and this idea that that scapegoats are created that allows the two parties to reconcile, put all the blame on the scapegoat. And what that does is it hides the mimesis as the root cause, because all the blame goes on the scapegoat. Oh, they caused this problem, right? And so Girard had a book called Things Hidden Since the Foundation of the World. And the real thing that was hidden was this scapegoat mechanism, as he calls it, mimesis and rivalry leading to scapegoating. So when he opened this up for people, and it's hard to go back into the world after you read Girard and not see it. So you start seeing it everywhere in politics, in
like Trump and
international wars.
Trump and the Mexicans and the immigrants. That's our problem. Or China blames the U.S. or Russia blames Western decadence or something. So yeah, totalitarian regimes always have a scapegoat for sure.
Yeah.
And Jews have been served as scapegoats throughout the centuries. Like Hitler. Yeah.
That too, yeah. Exactly.
So your dissertation exactly was what?
So the dissertation actually applied Girard's theory to 3 texts in the Hebrew Bible. So I didn't feel like they were adequately explored with a real understanding of Judaism beneath them and how the Hebrew texts operate. So I looked at a ritual of Shabbat from a text with Jacob in Genesis. I looked at the Book of Esther, and then I looked at the Book of Jonah. And it was important that each text had a ritual associated with it, because I understood ultimately the ritual to keep mimesis in check. So I called it Jewish vaccines against mimetic desire. They're kind of like vaccines we take through doing the ritual so that we don't get into this really violent kind of rivalry in our life or conflict. Even if it's just emotional, obviously, but yeah.
Did that dissertation get published?
It did in different chapters. So ultimately what I chose to do was, I had delivered the chapters at conferences so many times as well that I thought it was easier to publish them that way in the end. So they're all out there for public consumption.
What was it like to do graduate work in Canada and England as compared to the States?
I didn't feel much of a difference in Canada when I was up there. I mean, that was a long time ago, and I was, of course, in the bubble of a university, so I don't think I experienced what it is to really be in Canada as a citizen and work and such. But the people are, I mean, many of them are still my best friends, and they are just friendly and laid back. I'm from New York City, so I'm not particularly, so anyone might be laid back compared to me. But they were really laid back and kind people.
That's the stereotype. Canadians are nice.
They are. They really are.
That's been my experience.
Yeah.
And what about the University of Exeter?
Exeter, well, that was actually done mainly through the satellite program at Hartford International University. They used to be called Hartford Seminary. So it was a joint program. I did most of my work in Hartford. I did go to Exeter for a residency, and I did have an advisor there, and we communicated mainly through email. So Exeter, when I did my residency, I mean, it was wonderful. I think, it was only a few months that I lived there. And it recalled my degree in London very much so. I love England. I love being in England. I might never have left. But it was time to come home. So
Where did you meet your husband in your travels?
My husband, actually, I met him when I was about 22 in New York City. He had just graduated from Princeton, And I was staying for an extra year at McGill. So I'd finished my 4th year, but I was staying on to do some extra courses I wanted to do. We have mutual friends, and it wasn't until much later. I went through various degrees here and there, and he basically stayed in New York City, went to New Jersey for a while, but we reconnected later in life and got married.
So you thought of him at first just as friends, and something changed in the chemistry between the two of you?
No, I loved him from the moment I saw him.
I just did a book called Happy Marriages about couples with long durations of their marriage, and I'm interested in what makes a marriage stay vibrant over time. Do you have any insights in terms of your experience?
What makes a marriage last? Well, communication is certainly key. And I think communicating kindly is helpful, although it's sometimes hard. But to try at least, and to be able to hear your partner and what they need. I think that really is the key. We support each other. We've gone through a number of life events together, and
Like children or life events?
children, death, money, no money, just a lot of things, and work and good work situations and bad work situations, and I've traveled for work often. I worked in St. Louis, I worked in Ohio, so we've moved a lot. So we've been through a lot, and I just think the ability to keep communicating, and while I think it's hard to change, sometimes we have to change to meet each other's needs. And as long as you can keep doing that and not losing yourself at the same time, it's very important.
Mm-hmm. To go back to your research, Book of Esther, why was Esther particularly interesting to you? And was she a prophet? I've forgotten her role.
Not a prophet per se. She was a queen.
Oh,
an unlikely queen, you might say. She was, an orphan brought up by her uncle, Jewish in a Persian context. So this is not necessarily history. It's really like historical fiction of what it's like for the Jewish people to live in exile. But, there was a call for a new queen after the first queen was, in my interpretation, scapegoated. And so she was picked as the most beautiful. And what fascinated me, I guess, was how through my understanding of Girard and his paradigm, if you look at Esther through Girard's theory, then you could see how there's this rivalry between, and it gets into some of the details of the story, but you could see that there is clearly a rivalry between the Jewish people and the Persian kingdom, and to the point where the Persians say, oh, we're going to exterminate the Jews. So the rivalry gets really bad, obviously. And so the Jews were about to be scapegoated. And what Queen Esther does is she manages, through this kind of ritualistic process, to turn the tables such that the Jews don't get exterminated, but the one person who was responsible for sending out that edict to the kingdom to kill the Jews, he's the one who falls instead. And then the Persians and the Jews are reconciled. So it's interesting, she turns the scapegoating table from the Jews onto actually the guilty party. And usually the scapegoat is not the guilty party. So it's not a perfect fit with Girard, and there are still, a lot of questions, but I use this book because Esther's been problematic in history for both, mainly for Christians, I think, but perhaps for Jews too, because there is a lot of violence in the book. Especially, not just the edict to exterminate the Jews, but at the end there's a lot of violence, where actually a lot of the Jewish people are killed if they don't. Under the edict, everyone kind of had to go if they didn't agree. And it's, people wonder why the end had to be so violent. Why couldn't the edict have been done away with? Why couldn't the guilty party named Haman he was killed? Why couldn't that be enough? But instead they had to have this violent conflict. So that was the real question, and to reveal the answer, if anyone's interested, it's the very edict that couldn't be revoked. The king actually said it could not be revoked. So even though it was changed in nature, my understanding of that edict for extermination is that is the scapegoat mechanism that rules society. So we could never actually revoke it. It has to play out.
Oh, wow.
And the interesting thing about Esther and how disturbing it is on many levels is that God never appears in the book. There are interpretations over history where people kind of put him in, but he literally never appears in the book. And God is not present in my theology in a scapegoating mechanism. So if Esther is the scapegoating mechanism, then it's clear to me why God is not present in it. It's just a book that to me says, this is the way of the world. And if you realize that, perhaps we can step out of it for a few moments. And that's our vaccine, is to hear the book and to hear really the message of it.
It's interesting to me that there, on one hand, the Old Testament has women as prophets and key figures who manipulate behind the scenes, the king or whatever, like Esther. And yet there's the tradition of women don't study Torah. Like Jesus had to say, Mary hath chosen the better part to be doing theology discussions with me rather than Martha in the kitchen. So how do those two traditions come together? Women as leaders, prophets, women should manage the household to let men study Torah. study Torah.
Yeah, that's interesting. Very traditionally, men have been the ones to study and read Torah aloud. It's not that way anymore unless you're among the ultra-Orthodox that still separate the genders. And even, it's interesting, even in Orthodox circles, I read the other day, there was a movement of women in my home of Queens, New York, my birth home, where they started their own services.
Orthodox women?
The Orthodox women were meeting together and reading from Torah and doing their own services. And it's interesting because the article said that some of the Orthodox community, the rabbis, were saying if this is fulfilling for them and part of their religious path, then they should do it. But others were saying that's not traditionally what women will do and they shouldn't be doing it. So even among the Orthodox, and you'll find this with Jewish people all over the world and everywhere, that there's disagreement on particular aspects of observance. And I think that's part of the healthy dialogue that we keep going, we maintain through the years, that there's not just one way. And so people will kind of just toss around, what do we need in this time, this era, this context, what do people need? And I do think that there are adjustments along the way. Sometimes it's harder for some communities to move forward with some adjustments, but because of the maintaining of the tradition. But yeah, I do see a lot of women reading Torah and my mom, she did her Torah portion too, about Bas Mitzvah in the 60s. So women are definitely taking part in those traditions now, which I think is great.
Do conservatives ask women to do the mitzvah ritual cleansing bath after menstruation or childbirth, or do they not require that cleansing?
Conservative is a really broad spectrum of people. So some conservative Jews will lean more toward Orthodox and some will lean more toward Reform. And almost, you might not even know the difference sometimes. But really more the Orthodox will do the ritual bathing and the mikvah and things like that. Not the conservatives that I know, but there probably are some that do,
Because it does convey the idea that at least part of the time women are unclean in a way that men aren't. I mean, if men cut themselves, they don't have to have a ritual cleansing if they bleed, even for Orthodox, right? It's a women's thing to be unclean.
Yeah, and I think that was the root of not reading the Torah as well, is that women couldn't do it at certain times, and so essentially it's childbirth, it's menstruation, it's various times. So, but no, conservative Jews for the most part, as I said, not the ones I know. So there would be no issue with reading Torah at any time for the communities I know.
Neat. You're the executive director of Sharing Sacred Spaces. What kind of work do you do?
Sharing Sacred Spaces, we're a nonprofit organization, and we use, well, the really unique thing about us, there are a couple of unique things, but we use architecture to bring people together across religious difference. And I say religious difference, but really when I put the programs together, we incorporate ethnic differences and racial differences very deliberately as well. But we use architecture as the gateway, if you will. So we work in different locations. We're in 4 cities right now, ramping up in a 5th, where we have usually 8 religious communities. We bring together in a year-long process of visiting one another's spaces, and we coach them in how to give a meaningful architectural religious tour, as well as sharing by the community different elements that go into the visits. But aside from just those tours, the 8 communities participate in dialogue training together over the course of the year. So by the end of it, they're a very strong interreligious group of friends, really. And then the second phase would be that they do a project together as the interreligious community.
Did you get involved in Chico's Shalom Free Clinic, which is between a congregational church and a Jewish synagogue, sponsored this free clinic for healthcare?
I was not able to do that, no. Maybe because I'm a remote lecturer, but yeah, there's a lot of things going on at Chico I would love to do if I were on ground there. I'm pretty far away, unfortunately.
Yes, you are. So when I visit, let's say, a Catholic church, am I also encouraged to go to a service, or is it just we do a walk around and this is the altar and this is the confession booth, or what's the structure of the visit?
So the structure is that we don't go to service, and that's another thing that makes us different. So we have a specialized visit where we would do a good half an hour, I would say, on a tour, and that really gets into, not just here's the baptistry, although, we talk about the baptistry, but here is the whole layout of a Catholic church is really a ship. The word nave comes from, like naval, comes from the word ship. And so when you're sitting in a Catholic church, this is just an example, you're sitting in a ship that is oriented in a particular direction. And if you are sitting in a pew and you look above, you see the crucifix, pretty much always. So your direction is toward salvation in this very particular paradigm. So your ship is your paradigm. And it's really interesting when some Catholics don't even realize that that's the space that they find themselves in, and how it's organized, so to speak. But as a non-Catholic person, when you sit in that space, it's really interesting when you self-reflect on, well, how do I feel in this space? And what offsets sometimes what could be discomfort is the hospitality of the group. So that person to person, and we go out of our way to be hospitable. We name tags and papers we hand out and greetings, and we do it very deliberately. So part of that visit is really an architectural tour that goes deeper than most, I would say, tours of religious spaces. And then we have a brief history of the tradition, a history of that community, so we put that community in context. And then we have sharing by members, which is really also different. We like the lay people to come in and talk, share about their spiritual journeys mainly, and a lot of commonalities emerge out of the members sharing. And if we're in person, we eat together and we do a dialogue exercise. We haven't been in person, we've been virtual. So we still do an exercise just without the food. We go into breakout rooms, we talk about a topic, a question that came out of the event. So everyone gets to personally interact with a small group of other people during the event, always. And I wouldn't have it any other way. So,
what's an example of a project that's come out of the visit?
So a New Haven, I'll use New Haven, for example, their project. Their project was, we were deliberating it shortly after the shooting at the synagogue in Pittsburgh, Squirrel Hill, which was, a horrific event. And it was on people's minds. And they wanted to understand, how do we respond when things like this happen? What does that community need? What can we do? Because I think always there's a feeling of helplessness. What can I really do? So they wanted to explore this question. It was less of a project, more like a research project in a way. So they chose to revisit everyone's sacred space and hear from each community, how do you respond to hate? From a spiritual, religious point of view, but also a very practical point of view. So we learned from 8 different religions what they do. It was written up in a manual.
Great.
And I do have that manual. It's not posted on our website yet, but we're working on a platform for it. And it's everything from, the Zen master's stories of spontaneous interaction in a hateful context, and how relationships can be transformed, distracted. Very interesting, amazing stories we have from him. To, the Greek Orthodox priest who, or talking about the archbishop who walked with MLK, a strong symbolic gesture against hate, to statements that they deliver, to prayer and action. So we have, from all the different traditions, so many really different kinds of ways to respond. I thought it was really powerful. And then we responded. We used our knowledge to actually respond to instances of vandalism around the country, mostly through letter writing. But, when you tell a community that's been vandalized, if you have 8 different religions signing a piece of paper that say, we're sorry for what happened to you. You belong here, no matter what anyone says. That's powerful.
Yes, absolutely. How did you get interested in this approach of space architecture?
I have one person to thank, and that is a woman named Suzanne Morgan. She actually came up with the idea to use architecture to bring people together. She has She is a retired architect. She focused on liturgical design, so designing religious spaces. And she, living in Chicago, especially after 9/11, she really wanted to figure out a way to use her expertise to build bridges. And she started doing these kinds of tours. And then in 2011, she worked with the Parliament of World Religions to do the first project that I just described to you. And I picked up managing those projects, directing those projects in 2016 or 17. So somewhere right in there. And so we're on our 5th city now. So we get to do about one a year.
Are they in the States so far, all the cities?
4 in the States, 1 is in Toronto.
Because with Zoom and whatever, you can do it anywhere.
Yeah, we used to do them in person, and then we transitioned during the pandemic. I had 2 cities already running during the pandemic. Toronto launched during the pandemic, although we did our on-ground work. We had already finished that part. So yeah, we have a particular way of doing them online. So we keep the trips shorter, but we do like documentary films before each event. So we pre-record the tour, we pre-record the interviews and the spiritual journeys, and it's a 25 to 30 minute documentary of each congregation that we show and then discuss and do breakout rooms. So it keeps it moving quickly and it keeps it exciting, I think.
And are those available online? Because they should be.
They are, yeah. So some are on YouTube, but I have a database on our website, and they're all freely accessible right now.
What's the website?
SharingSacredSpaces.org.
Okay, great. Finishing up here, you teach in Chico State in Northern California and at Yale Divinity School. How did the Chico gig take place?
How did the Chico gig take place? So I was working in Ohio. I had just started working on the Sharing Sacred Spaces projects. And, I know several people actually who are or were in the department at Chico. Some people who I met later in life, some who I met long time ago. But I've always been in contact with them as friends. And I heard a position was opening up. And I applied to the chair and was very happy to have received this position. And originally I was actually looking at moving out there to do more, but the way that it turned out, leading the Sharing Sacred Spaces organization, I needed to be in Connecticut and lecture online. So that's where we are now. It's been great. It's been great.
I imagine that there's pretty big differences between Chico State students and Yale Divinity students. Do you find that, and how do you manage the differences?
Yeah, very different. And not the students themselves, I'd say, but just the contexts are really different. So I've been teaching online for some 20 years or so for various places. Chico probably about 5 years now. And I teach a sociology of religion course for the Chico students. And since I had created it before the pandemic, it was created in an asynchronous way, such that I didn't really have much interaction with the students except through certain lectures and feedback and, ways that we would communicate that way. And I pretty much kept it that way because it's always worked well. It's a very organized, clear course, and the students seem to do very well in a structured format. And they were required to go on a field trip to do a participant observation. That's the one thing that's really changed is since the pandemic, and I started doing these online visits, the students can come to my visits as their field observation, which is really, I think, such an amazing way for me to meet the students, because then I do have the chance to meet them and they have the chance to interact with a religious community that they wouldn't have had the chance to otherwise. So to me, it's a win-win situation, and I hope for the students too. So that's one context, and the Chico students are great. But the Yale format, it's a 12-student seminar, very focused on sacred architecture and also meeting the religious communities, but it's a much, I would say, more focused discussion, whereas Chico is a much more, it's an introductory course. So really just very different by nature.
Mm-hmm. Do you find in the people who participate in the visits that there are more women? Because usually in churches, there's many more women who go to religious ceremonies than men. Has that been, have you seen that in your work?
Yeah, to a certain degree, I guess I would say yes. Yeah, and you're right about the attendance of women in religious communities. It does tend to be more women. Um, you see a little bit of a difference with, for example, Islam, or I hesitate to say Buddhism just because I know the centers where we are, there are a lot of men. So yeah, our Buddhists do bring more men into our programs. The Muslims do, just our programs. We have a fairly even distribution. The people who attend the big visits, maybe we have a few more women, but it's not a vast difference. It's not like 90% versus 10%. It's maybe more like 70% women, maybe even less. And I think of a lot of men. So I haven't actually done the analytics. Maybe I should do that and see how many, because
it's interesting.
Yeah.
Last question. Young people are less and less religiously observant. They may think of themselves as spiritual but not religious, at least in the States. What's your take on that?
Yeah. What's my take on that? I think that part of what I consider important is creating dialogue between religious people and those who are the nuns, as they're often called, because I think there are misunderstandings on both sides. I think religion has gotten a bad rap for a long time as creating divisions and being more of a negative force in society. And certainly part of what I like to convey to my students is that religion creates a lot of, really positive impact on society. It fills a lot of gaps that we wouldn't be able to do otherwise. Who's going to do your funeral?
Your wedding.
Even if you never go inside a church or a synagogue or a mosque, whatever, if your parent dies, who are you going to call? and that happens a lot. And, it's the same situation in Europe, which is why I think apart from the beautiful historical architectural monuments to religion they have, it's also that they know, the government knows and still subsidizes those religious communities because they fulfill this needed gap, even if people are not religious. Weddings, funerals, things like that. So, as well as feeding the hungry and taking care of elderly and making sure people have supports, they do so much that we wouldn't have otherwise. So I think there's a big negative kind of stereotype on religion. And on the other side, I think there's also a stereotype of, this not understanding where the non-religious get their sense of values and ethics and sense of meaning. If it doesn't come from religion, where does it come from? And I think people do have that question. So I think there are just misunderstandings, and dialogue is more important than ever between those two groups. And the spectrum, there's such a wide spectrum too.
Yeah, between evangelicals and Unitarians, or yeah, there's a big gap.
Big gap. And you had, what was it, 10, 15 years ago, that you had a lot of books that were put out, um, you know, supporting atheists against religion, but they were really vicious against religion. And what are their names? I'll have to remember all their names. They're not off. I'll remember them when I'm not trying to remember them. But there were 3 different authors basically who put out these books that were just, very hostile, and said a lot of hostile things about religion. So that didn't help. So it gave religious people kind of a thorn in their side against people who are non-religious. And then the non-religious also were reading these scathing things about religion. So it just polarized people a lot. And it's calmed down a little bit, but there's work to be done.
That's a good note.